All right, thank you very much, everyone, for joining in. I'd like to welcome everyone to a very exciting webinar that we have lined up today. My name is Nizam. I'm the head of growth at Crowd Content. And today we have an awesome speaker and a great topic to talk about. So Supercharge your SEO with Schema Markup, something that most SEO experts are kind of overlooking, or even like don't see the potential that the Schema Markup has in terms of SEO improvements and reaching your SEO goal. So the speaker that we have with us today is Martha van Berkel. She is the co-founder and CEO of Schema App. And before starting Schema App, she actually worked at Cisco for 14 years. And then she decided to start Schema App and change the world with Schema Markup. Welcome, Martha.
Thanks. I changed the world. I don't know. Structure the world's content, maybe, but not. I think maybe we're changing your experience in search. How about that?
That makes sense. Yeah, I should say like the SEO a little bit, which makes sense. So again, obviously we do have a really exciting topics that and few line items to kind of talk about. But before we get into that, I kind of wanted you to share your journey, why Schema App and why study your journey, leaving your job and starting something cool. So kind of wanted to share your story with the audience.
Sure. So thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. So why Schema App? Well, it goes really, really back to the day where my co-founder, who is also my husband, Mark Van Berkel, he's actually a semantic technologist by background. And what's interesting about semantics is it's actually like the same technology that Google uses in order to do inferencing. And so he was on a mission to apply it in the real world. So he had a master's in it, and he just loved the fact that you could build relationships between things. And so he's building different technology and different software. And then, we sort of discovered the fact that like search was using this as a way to structure their content in order for search engines to understand to achieve those rich results. And so on his journey, entrepreneurship journey, well, he is an amazing technologist and product person. He needed a co-founder who's sort of passionate about telling the story and explaining things and selling the ideas, which happens to be what I'm really good at. And I also have a technical background because it's a very technical area of search. And so we married our two strengths and started Schema App. And it's interesting because like we really started doing structured data manually, like for local businesses. We kind of ended up as an agency by accident on our journey to Schema App. And he discovered really like he's like, I can generate this faster with less errors and with sort of while still doing very sophisticated markup where you're sort of defining the relationships between things. And so he built Schema App to sort of solve his own problem. And entrepreneurs talk about like scratching your own itch. And so we kind of built it, but this was in 2015. Like we had it, we were sort of using it in 2014, 2015. And I'll never forget me pitching some large companies, some in Toronto and sort of across the board saying like semantic search marketing, like this is what it is, and this is how it's going to change the world. And people thought I was crazy. And lo and behold, actually a bunch of them are our customers now. They've come back and been like, oh yes, this is an area of search that we need to do and has like measurable value. So we've really been on the forefront of helping people adopt structured data at scale, think of it strategically, and really measure the ROI. And my role has been the storyteller, the salesperson, the marketer, the expert. I've also done every job at Schema App because we started as a team of two, and I left Cisco because I wanted to move fast. I was tired of working in a large organization where I was still doing entrepreneurial work, but I was looking to sort of be able to help organizations, adopt that agility and make things a reality. And so that's what we do. So we help, mid to large organizations, not just think about their strategies around structured data, but execute on them and then measure results.
Awesome. That's quite a story for sure. Thank you very much for sharing. So I'll jump right into it. So to begin with the agenda that we have lined up today, again, we'll talk about back to basic, what is actually Schema Markup, and then going into rich result and sort of how do you get started. where to begin, and if you are already doing some work around schema markup, how do you even enhance that and track and monitor and go from there, right? So I think that's quite crucial. And obviously, I'm sure every marketer will agree with us, whether you're an SEO or in another sector of marketing, like there is no alternative of tracking and data, like understanding what's happening with your site, what's happening with your search results, and your overall like an SEO initiative. So obviously, this is something that Martha is very passionate and experts in, and I'm sure like everyone can utilize her expertise and knowledge, and then can put that into like in a sort of like in practice right after the webinar. And and quick reminder from here, if you do have any question, use the chat and the Q&A feature to can ask your question. We will take all the questions, that at least try our best to answer the questions that we get towards the end of the presentation that Martha has. And then we'll go from there. So without further ado, take it away, Martha.
All right, so I'll go ahead and share my screen. I'm really excited today to share sort of like a way that you can build a practical strategy with regards to structured data, and how that really sort of allows you to start thinking through content, measuring results, and sort of pitching the ROI of doing this within your organization. I have put a slide with sort of resources at the end. So as the questions come in and as we sort of want to kind of delve deeper, I'll make sure that that's updated. So when Nizam shares it afterwards, you have everything that you need in order to start or sort of evolve your structured data journey. Now you got a little bit of my background, but as a super nerd in structured data, I do like to use a schema markup to introduce myself. And so as you shared earlier, like I did spend 14 years at Cisco, so I understand the challenges of moving fast and sort of getting adoption within large organizations. I do have a technical background, so have a degree in mathematics and engineering, and went to MIT for strategy and innovation. I am one of the founders of Schema App. I'm Canadian. During the pandemic, I spent lots of quality time with my two children. And I used to own a 1965 Austin Healey Sprite. And my car actually was in the movie called Losing Chase that Kevin Bacon directed. And so Kevin Bacon used to drive my car. And the reason I use this is that you're just going, yes, because you now know that you can win the Kevin Bacon game, because you're now 3 degrees from Kevin Bacon. And what you did is you inferenced something, you figured something out as a result of the relationships between me and the movie and Kevin Bacon. And that's exactly what Google does. When it reads your structured data, it has understanding of the relationships between your content, so it can then infer things in order to answer the searcher's intent. And so, I've used structured data to explain my relationships between things. And what I'm endeavoring today is to teach you a little bit about how you can start doing that within your own content. Now, I often like to start with like just a little bit about like the search engine result pages has evolved significantly, and it continues to change. In fact, I saw, like someone was saying today, there's like a new feature snippet around like from other sites, right? So it's like instead of people also ask, they've now introduced some new headings here. And so this is constantly evolving. And what I like to think about structured data is that there is an element of control that you can take using structured data on how you show up in these pages. And people are very familiar with, in a local business, like how do you show up in Google My Business? This top piece here for SAP on what is SAP is an FAQ that they've done with structured data, allowing them to take over and control exactly what's showing up there and how they appear. And this is where I'm really passionate, because so much of your search engine and result page, like you just don't control. And so I love that there's a lever that you can use in order to control your brand. And so just to make sure we're all on the same page, so structured data is an SEO strategy that both helps your content be understood, so understanding those relationships and what it's about, but also stand out in search. And you'll hear me use both the terms structured data and schema markup interchangeably. And within the search world, they're equivalent. Now, if you have a technical background, you're like, Martha, structured data is like, can be structured anyway. It can be structured in HTML, it can be structured in a table, it can be structured in an SQL database. Yes, 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 yes. I hear you. But in the SEO space, it's considered the same thing. And the reason at Schema App we prefer schema markup is that it's more specific, right? It can't be misconstrued with other things. And considering it's a vocabulary that's supposed to disambiguate things, right? Make things clear, let's at least call it something that isn't confusing. But you'll hear me use these interchangeably. And structured data is code. And I like to share this because people are like, Martha, you're talking about this thing, it's describing it. I use this example. This is in the old schema structured data testing tool. Like this is the code. It's JSON LD. It can also be a microdata. And it's explaining things like, what is this page about? With a job posting, with a date, a name, a description. And I'll give you lots of tools that you can do to kind of understand what's there. But note it is code that Google understands. And it's all based on this vocabulary called schema.org. So if you think of Schema.org, it's like a vocabulary for search engines, just like you have English and French, Spanish, and it describes lots and lots and lots of different things. And it's been around for a while. So 2011 was when it was created, same year that Schema App was sort of our company got founded. And it really is applied across the board. It's constantly evolving, but it's a collaboration effort. It's not owned by Google. It's a community that sort of evolves the vocabulary in order to explain what things are. And interesting, like over the last couple of years, a lot of investment has gone in on the health side, describing sort of like all different types of things in health, describing vaccines, all these other areas. So it is constantly evolving based on the needs of the world. Now, one of the things that came out, and this has been about like 2019, is Google said, use structured data to help us understand your content and be found across platforms. So we all know about mobile and desktop search, but voice search, Google Assistants, 3-4 years ago, that was all we were talking about. And there's actually structured data, FAQ, videos, et cetera, that sort of are found and used within Google Assistant. And then they also talked around discovery on all surfaces. And I love this, the strategist and futurist in me loves this as, like we do searches on voice in our car, our houses are connected. So, it'll be interesting how this discovery and all search services continues to evolve over time. Now you're like, okay, Martha, I understand this code. I understand Google created, like, why do I care? What is the outcome of this? Well, I talked about taking control of your brand. And so there's 32 different documented ways, rich results is what they're called, that you can actually show up in search. And so I want to go through some examples here today to get you thinking. And then I'm actually going to take you to the documentation so you can keep learning about this and finding out about it. And I'm also going to share some fun updates that we just got from Google. So within the Google documentation, there is the 32 different listings of like, these are the different features or rich results that are specifically made eligible as a result of adding structured data to your site. And you can see that they range from book, breadcrumb, carousels, local business, jobs, FAQ events, speakable software apps, recipes, question, and a whole long range. And so what we're going to do today is explore like which of these apply to your business and sort of your website, and which ones will get you the return that you're looking for to help you achieve your goals. And these show up like when they apply, they show up beautifully in the search engine results. So I love sort of the outcome of doing structured data, because we all know sort of when we're trying to make the business case in order to do this, like you have to show evidence. And so I love that the results are like that hard evidence. So product is one that you often see. You can see FAQ sort of, I love this because it can be used across pretty much anything. Videos are a great way sort of like to make sure that those videos are found, you get people to watch it. How to is another one, especially if you have a services area of your business where you're trying to get people to self-serve. That's where I grew up at Cisco, was in the services organization. SAP here is using it to like help people use SAP and sort of find the right support documentation. And so those are just a few of my favorites, and we'll go through this in more detail. Now you may ask, like, Martha, it's great the structured data, but like, why do I have to do this? Like, does Google really care? And so I got really excited last week or the week, because on April 7th, Google has a podcast like Behind Search, and they did one on structured data. What's it all about? And Ryan Levering joined the two hosts, and he's a software developer that specifically works on structured data. Now, these Google podcasts are often interesting for me because I either feel like it's going to be like a big birthday gift or a bomb. But good news, it was an early birthday gift again for us. And they talked about how control, right? So what I said earlier, that like they like that structured data gives control to the user. And they also talked about how they like originally tried to produce it, but it was too not cost effective for Google, which is why now the burden is on all of you to do it yourself so that they can consume it. And they need to give you a reason why to do that. So that's why they have rich results. They also talked about like using it, that they use it to produce those rich results, but they also sometimes use it to understand topics. So if, let's say, their machine learning can understand so much of the page, but they need a little bit of help or clarity, they'll sometimes go to the structured data in order to inform that. One of the challenges Google has is making sure that the structured data aligns to the content on your page. And so they talked about how, like doing it manually or sort of producing the code and then forgetting about it is not the great way to do it. They talked about schema markup drift, being where like the structured data doesn't represent what's on the page. And so sort of doing it programmatically. And this is, again, we're Schema App. This is what we do. We do structured data at scale programmatically, but they said to make sure it matches that content. So again, something to think about. And then finally, they talked about future plans where they're going to include more features and eventually sort of like look at using it across sort of the Google experience. Very vague, but good news, is not going away. All the more reason why you should be listening to today as to like, how do you get started? How do you make sure that you use it to supercharge your SEO and sort of your content strategy? So I've put a link for that podcast here. It's 30 minutes. I also have a summary of it on our blog if that's of interest. So the schema markup process. Now we're going to get into a bit of the details. So the schema markup process really starts with strategy. And strategy is like, what should you optimize for what outcome? And this is where we're going to spend the start of this workshop and webinar. So if you have a piece of paper and a pen, this is the time to like get that out, or a notepad on your keyboard, so that we're going to try to figure out like, where should you start? What are the types of things that you should optimize? After you know that, then it's a question of creating the JSON-LG, or authoring, as we call it. Again, there's tools out there, there's generators. So we'll talk a little bit about what options you have there. Getting it on your website, deployment, maintenance, and then reporting and analytics. I'm not going to talk too much. I'll send at the end a little bit about Schema App and what we do and some options there. But I'm going to talk a little about reporting so that you know how to measure the value, see if you're doing it today. So my goal today is to make sure you understand the strategy, understand what you should be optimizing, and then how you measure that outcome, and then give you some use cases on sort of what people saw as that outcome when they did it. Sound good? Everyone with me? All right, let's jump into strategy. So often, and I just literally got off a discovery call with a customer, you got to start with the business goals. So when we talk about structured data strategy, I often like to talk about like, what is the key content in your customer journey? What are the pieces of content or things that you need discovered or found? And this can range from, if you're in a healthcare organization, you might want your physicians found, your services, your hospital locations. If you're a technology business, it could be your products that you really want found, or your support documentation, or your white papers about sort of like industry-wise that like you're trying to solve problems like for those specific industries. So you want to capture what those pieces are. And I'll give you a table and a model on our next slide. The other piece I often ask is like, if you have an issue, so like for 2022, you're trying to grow this area of your business, right? That would be the other area again, like, well, where is that business represented on our website? And how do we look that? And then finally, like, what do you sell? And what we often do and what we do for our customers is we actually ask these questions as part of how we do scoping. Like, can we add value, right? Where should we try to add value? And so we talk about like key concepts. So all those things that are important to your business, how do you like write down what they are? So I've done this for Schema App just as a way to sort of illustrate how I would actually look at breaking down our strategy. So our company is one piece, right? I want people to know who we are. We have our solutions, which is our products. I have case studies, some of which you're going to see today. I have blogs, and the blogs are sort of informing people about sort of thought leadership. For example, me, excuse me, breaking down like what Google just shared in their podcast. And then I also want our customers to find support so they really get sort of that value and that care that we want. And so these are some of the, like, I'll say key content pieces that I want people to find and read and to stand out in search. And then second, we then ask the question of like, well, what is this thing? And when I talk about what is this thing, I'm actually asking it in the terms of the schema.org vocabulary. So, we talk about philosophers being very good at schema markup. So what is this thing is like, well, what's my company? Well, the company is an organization. What's my solution? Well, it's a set of products. My case studies are articles. My blogs are blog postings, and my support is also articles. They're technical articles. And so, part of understanding this vocabulary, it's a really actually good initiative to actually go to schema.org and try to search for the things and try to be as specific as possible. For example, if you do services, like you might talk about the services specifically. Or if you're a medical organization, the medical clinic, like you want to be really, really specific. Some of mine are higher level, like more general. These are often some of the common ones that people have. And then once you figure that out, so we know what it is, now we're talking about in this common vocabulary, we're going to talk about like, where is it on the website? And this is where, like, ideally there's, if it's only one thing, like my product, like where is that listed? And the example I was sharing, Nizam, with you the other day was, like this customer called me and they're like, oh, I do accounting software. And I was like, great, let's look at your website. And I was like, which one page talks about your accounting software? And they're like, well, we don't really have one page. We have these 15 pages that talk about all the features. And then the question I often ask back, I was like, great, so which one is Google going to point them to if they're looking for your software? And so this comes down to, like, having pages that talk about the very specific thing. And that's the primary page that's talking about that specific thing. And I was featured in the SEO in 2022 book that Majestic Software put together. And, that was my whole thing, is specificity. Like I think Google wants to know, like, what is that specific page that's talking about your amazing car that Kevin Bacon used to drive, so that we know exactly where to go. Or like, what page is talking about Martha, the founder, or which page is talking about, in this case, like the support page about integration with Adobe Experience Manager, right? So what you want to do is make sure you have at least one page that's the primary page that's talking about that thing. And what you might discover is that there's many pages. So you see that I do have many things in the case studies, but these are the different case studies about companies, right? So it's the SAP case study, it's the Keen Footwear case study, it's the Advent Health case study. But it's more about, again, like if there's specific areas like your services or other products, et cetera, that you need to be able to articulate that.
One quick note, Martha. I think I've seen in the past, like, people, when there's multiple pages for one services, or like their services, they can tend to add schema markup, letting on all pages, hoping that Google pick one, right? which seems to be like a guessing game, but which isn't, right? I guess like the right solution is to kind of focus one and go from there.
Oh, you've hit on like one of my pet peeves. I think Jono Alderson and from Yoast and I often debate this, but it's like, you also shouldn't have organization markup on every page, right? Because then which page is actually talking about your organization? Now, I'm not going to get into nesting very much today. That's like our second webinar. We'll go into some advanced pieces, but like you can say that the case study is published, or the publisher is Schema App or the organization, but we want to nest it and define that relationship versus sort of it being that the page is about that. So that's where sort of, I'll say, like sophisticated schema markup versus what I call peanut butter schema markup. That approach is, again, being specific, making sure the markup is illustrative of the specific thing on the page.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, and John Mueller talked about like having one type on the page, and I agree with that. The key is also like making sure that the page is about the thing that it's really about. So, for example, if it is a service that it's about, service is kind of fun because you can multi-type it with service and product and then get multiple rich results. But with services, you can also have an FAQ on that, but you, instead of like making FAQ page the primary thing, you use services, and then you say it's the subject of an FAQ. That makes you still eligible for the FAQ, but Google knows that it's about a service. All right, now that I've gotten super complicated. Okay, so once we know key pages on your website, right? What are they about? Do they exist on one page, right? We've already created opportunities here for like how we want to make sure we have a specific page. The next piece then is to figure out, like, is there a rich result you can get for these? And, I would say, like, the evolution of structured data, like I did talk about Google using it for understanding, but the primary piece is it's giving you control to get a feature. And then it's sometimes used for understanding. So we want to make sure that it's clear about what it's about, but that you're also like thinking of structured data as like a measurable outcome, and something that you can actually get, like, again, a tangible visual, because if you're trying to invest in SEO and make sure that you have the return on investment, it's super important. So spend some time on this page. I think I'm going to show this page 3 or 4 times in my presentation. Why? Because these are the types of things, these are the types of rich results that you want to try to get your primary content, that important content that's super important for people to discover on your site, you want them to like have one of these related to it. And so it means, understanding like a course, right? So like, do you offer courses? Do you have events? Do you have FAQs on the page? Could you put FAQs on the page? I'm going to show an example with FAQ because I love FAQ because you can put it in lots of things. Is it a local business? Is it a job posting? Could you put something in a how-to? And this is why it comes back to content, right? So when you write content, you're trying to answer like, what are you trying to rank for? What are the questions you're trying to answer for your customer? You still want to write it with the intent for that user. But then we also want it to stand out in search, which means that like you need to think about like what that content piece is. And then again, is it going to have a video on it so we can get a video rich result? Are you going to put an FAQ at the bottom that sort of summarizes the top questions that you're answering within the content? We want to start architecting our content specifically for what the outcome is that we want. And if you go back to your list here, I want you to be thinking through like which of these make the most sense, which of these are even eligible today. And so I'll be knowing those pages and then going through these and figuring out which those are. Again, this is something we do as part of our sales process because we want to make sure that like you get the outcome. And so what I've done is I've actually then listed sort of like what rich results I can get on the different types of content that I have. And what this means then is that like when I created my product page, I made sure I had FAQs on it, right? Like when I create my case studies, I want to make sure there's a video on there. When I do my blogs, I want a video, a how to, or an FAQ. In support, I want to make sure I can get an article or a Q&A. Now you'll notice that for the company, I have not applicable. So it like on the primary homepage, you typically don't get a rich result. But it is important because if you think of my introduction slide where Martha's face was in the middle, like that's your company in the middle. So we still want to make sure we're optimizing and defining who your organization is because it's what connects everything else. So we want to make sure that we're doing that. And so really then, like if you know what rich result you want to target, and you can imagine like doing this at scale, right? Like you have industry pages, you have multiple solutions, you have, different blogs, different support articles, like the list goes, many events, many webinars, et cetera. Like you want to be thinking through each of these as to like, great, what rich result am I going to get for that? How do I architect those pages? And notice I'm not saying every page, you're architecting that set of pages to make sure that it's eligible for that result. So let me show you an example. We do a lot of work in healthcare. Have you figured that out yet? So I love healthcare. They kind of play by some different rules because a physician is actually a local business, but they can get a rating, whereas local business today can't get a rating. So with this as a physician, and they're trying to get two different rich results. They're trying to get the review as well as the FAQ, which means on their physician pages, they need to make sure they have the rating count, as well as an FAQ. On this example, this is actually our highlighter. Again, we were looking to get an FAQ because it's a product, but we don't have pricing and we don't have ratings on there. So like, how do we make sure that it's still standing out in search? How is it answering those initial questions people have about our product? And so we've sort of built this in. And so what you have to do is actually go to that, Martha's favorite page again in Google's documentation, and identify the required and recommended properties in order to inform your content. So let's have a look at what that looks like. So again, if I'm here and I'm just like, okay, I'm going to show you an example with FAQ, I'd come here for FAQ specifically. And then within the FAQ documentation, the picture is not so great. I'll have to update the quality on that. But like the FAQ here is, it gives us required and recommended properties. So here it's actually saying you need a question and you need an answer. And for the question, you have to nest an accepted answer and a name. And then the answer has to have a text. And you're like, oh my goodness, Martha, what does that mean in English? So let me sort of break it down for you more easily. So in order to get an FAQ result, you need to have 2 or more questions and answers. So if you have a page that only has 1 question on it, won't work. Okay. You need to have more than one. You need to make sure that the question includes the entire text of the question as well as the answer. So you need to have text for the question and text for the answer. And all the content has to be visible on the page. So this is true for all structured data. Remember I said Google's latest podcast was saying like, we need to make sure the structured data represents what's on the page. So it does need to be on the page in order for it to get it. So you can't just like put the code on and hope to get the rich result. It has to be visible to the user. It has to be representative of what's on the user. And then in the required and recommended, it's also telling you in the documentation how you have to nest it. And again, this is where the complexity that we solve at Schema App is to sort of how to build the code so it's beautifully nested so that you can get what you want. Like I said, I'll also share some other tools that out there that if you want to give it a try, some free generators and so forth available. But getting to know the documentation. Remember I said you got to spend some time on this page, understanding the different pieces. But the biggest takeaway is like, how do you know what's required and recommended? When you click on that FAQ, you look at the required and recommended and make sure that those elements are on your page. That's the starting point. And so as you get into things like events, it needs to have a date, it needs to have a time of start, it has to have a location, even if it's virtual, it could be a virtual location. So getting to know sort of what content has to be on the page, because once the content's there, then you can add the structured data and then you can get the rich result. All right, everyone still with me?
And is it fair to say that FAQ schema can be one of the quick wins because it's like easy to produce and you already have quite a lot of content around it? People are asking, your customers are already asking you questions, right?
Absolutely. Like I always say, like when everyone's like, well, how do I start with FAQ? I was like, what are the top questions your salespeople get? What are the questions your administrators are getting when they call into your office? What questions do you get sort of through the support channels? Like, the questions people are asking. It's just a way of, again, what's the page that's talking about that and then making sure that they're there. And then I love FAQ in that if you can also think, I'm always thinking scalable, right? It's like, usually your CMS has like an FAQ module or something that allows it to be structured in sort of like, questions and answers. And so, yes, I think that's a great place to start. Now, people have often asked like, but Martha, like questions, FAQs lead to like a 0 click-through rate. And actually Rand, who I believe is going to be on your webinar soon, did some really important studies about this in 2019. And the fact is like, it depends is the answer. Like we're seeing customers with 17% click-through rate on an FAQ, if it's appropriate, right? If it's something that's answering their question, and you can compose your answers in order to take them to that next step of the journey, right? So put a link in your answer that takes them to, learning more information about that specific thing. And then you can also measure the interaction with the FAQ, like through the impressions, and that then allows you to understand that like people are interacting with your content. And sometimes, like, what do they say? Like, 80% of the buyer journey happens before they contact you. So like, if you're answering your customers' questions, if you're helping them engage, learn the information they need in order to buy from you, then that's actually helping them progress on that buying cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also see this as a good branding play because obviously it kind of shows you there and you want to be there. You don't want your competitors to be like ranking for that search. And then if you do, I think it also increases your brand visibility overall, right? So it's like a win-win. Like you're not
Absolutely.
losing anything.
Well, and if you think of like those long tail keywords, like maybe it's an area that you really specialize in. The example I gave was like with SAP, like what is ERP? Like that's also like people very early in their buyer journey, right? Like are very early in that consideration stage is then sort of like getting awareness of who you are, right? Oh, who's this SAP company? And like, what are they doing? So I think it can be used in a lot of different ways. I like it as a way to delight your customers. You're not making them click, scour through your website or even read the long page to get those specific answers, right? So I do think it is low hanging fruit, and it's something that again gets you thinking about, I'm not just writing this content for the person who's landing on the page, but I'm getting the person who's like searching for us, which is that beginning of the buyer journey.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, so hopefully I've got you thinking about what are the key elements of your pages, like where do they live on your website, and which result do you want to try to get for it, so that you can then go back and say like, do I even have the content on the page, and what's the next step in order to do that? Because by the time then you're starting to call me or look at sort of solutions for doing it, you need to make sure that the content is ready. So I wanted to give you a couple tools to say like, well, am I doing structured data today? And so there's two tools, rich result testing tool, which is by Google, which tells you again, if the page is eligible for one of those ones in their documentation. So you can just come to this link, enter the URL. So if you made that list of URLs of the important content on your site, go through and you can test it and see today if you're eligible for anything. Or if you just want to see what the structured data says, the validator, which now lives on schema.org, allows you to also put in a URL and then sort of see what structured data is there. So you can see here it's an about page, it's about all these different things on the site. So these are like two ways for you to have visibility without reading code, to understand one, if you're eligible for a rich result, and two, sort of if there's structured data on the page. So a great way to kind of get your sense of like, am I doing this today? And then if not, or if you are, maybe it's not eligible for a rich result. So great, what are the required and recommended properties that I need to add? And if you actually, look in here, you can see it's valid item. It'll actually, if it's not valid, it'll show you errors. So it looks like what properties you need added. So let's talk a little bit about case studies, like all about ROI. So I've mentioned SAP. SAP is one of our customers, and with them, like working with Schema App and structured data, getting structured data, there's two things. One, they wanted agility. So how do we help an organization that's very large move very quickly in order to get structured data out there? So we were able to deploy markup to more than 4 million pages over 7 websites in our first 3 months. But then overall, they also saw 400% net growth of organic rich result traffic. And so, when you're looking at sort of what's the return on investment, where are you seeing growth in your traffic, it's very easy to correlate, and I'll show you how you can use Google Search Console in order to do that. But one of the benefits again is like, how do you own and really take over the SERP, take control of how that brand shows up. Now, Advent Health is very different. They also were looking to stand out. So you can see their beautiful FAQ as well as sort of ratings on their physicians. They actually use structured data also to inform Google of a brand change. So they went from Adventist Health System ordered over to Advent Health. And we were looking at sort of how do we use structured data as a way to inform of the brand and name change. So there's actually properties within organization that you can articulate sort of how that's changing. And then while they were doing the rebrand, they were also building out a new CMS and building out their content strategy. And so just like we talked about sort of what's the important content, how do you want it to stand out? We were able to strategize with them, plan the content with them so that as soon as it went live, we were achieving rich results right from the get-go. So a great example of how they actually mitigated risk of an organic clicks drop as a result of a rebrand and a new CMS, that we were able to sort of build net new results out of rich results. So different ways and different, depending on, again, the business goal. Remember, I started there, like, what are you trying to achieve? What are the important content pieces and how will you measure success? Speaking of measurement, I wanted to touch on like how do you know if it's working and what's coming out. So if you or someone on your team has access to Google Search Console, there's two places for you to look. Again, as you sort of query on sort of how you start using this, how you begin and explore the opportunities for your journey with structured data. So if you go in under performance reports and you bring up the performance, and then you'll see this like tab called search appearance. And under search appearance, they'll list the different types of search appearance. Now there's, web light results as well as good page experience. Those are not informed by structured data, but you'll see some of those things that we listed before: video, FAQs, reviews, products. Those are all listed here, and you can see exactly how many clicks or impressions you're achieving as a result of getting those results. And so then you can tell the story, like this is how structured data is impacting our goals around SEO. The other place to look under Search Console is under the Enhancement Reports. There is not an enhancement report for everything, but there are for some. And this allows you to see sort of, how many valid instances. So if, again, like you're doing all of your industry pages and you're going to have an FAQ on those, and each of those are an FAQ, you'd be able to come in here under FAQ and say like, okay, I have 16 industry pages. I expect to see 16 valid. It also allows you to identify here errors and warnings on, what is maybe missing. So here it's like, oh, it's missing a main entity, it's missing an accepted answer. How do you then sort of drill into that and figure out like how you fix it to make sure that you're getting the best performance? So these are two things that are just included as part of Google Search Console that allows you to understand what's working and what's available today. So in summary, you want to connect your schema markup to tell a story. You want to explain the important things in your organization, and you want them to stand out in search. And I've put together some resources, especially if you're at the start of this journey. This is a complicated area of SEO. This is maybe what I love about it. But there's a couple different areas. So one is Google Understand How Structured Data Works. So on that same favorite page of mine, right, where it lists all the different rich results, there's also an area that talks about like understanding it. And so Google goes through some understanding. There's some videos to explain what that is about. We also have 2 free resources. So we love sort of educating people on what we do. We have a 5-day email course. So it's just an email you get 5 days in a row that talks a little bit about sort of high level what it is. But if you want to get nerdy and you want to sort of learn from the best, my co-founder recorded. Now this is getting old. We're looking to update it. Is an advanced structured data bootcamp. It talks you through all the semantics, how things relate, important properties, structured data for key areas. But please use it as about 4 hours of content that we're happy to share. All right. So what do we do? Nizam, if you're good, I'll just take a couple minutes and explain who we are at Schema App and why we're so passionate about solving this problem. So we are an end-to-end schema markup solution that works with all websites, all content, to build robust, connected schema markup without an IT developer. And our whole goal is to help you get results with expert support. We know this is a complicated area. We want you to execute on strategies so that you can just measure those clicks. And we work with various different customers across different industries, and again, work across all different websites. And our whole goal is to empower your digital teams, right? Execute on the strategies, take control of how you show up in search. We want to help you do it at scale. And we also want to add agility. Like, I love the speed element of this. Like, I'm super hoping that Google announces a new feature at Google I/O, and then we'll turn around for our customers and be like, great, what content's eligible today? Let's get that marked up. Boom, bada bing, in less than a month, like everything's done, right? You don't have to think about it. You didn't have to stress about it. It just gets done. And we do that because we start with strategy. So what I shared with you today is actually like what we take our customers through. So as you consider working with us, we want to understand your business goals. We want to understand the content that needs to be found, and we'll build that strategy and your package with us based on your needs, based on those goals. Then we'll use our solution to implement it, to do that authoring, to do that integration. We'll power it with customer success to help you make sure that it gets done and that it's measurable. We'll measure it and then show you sort of those analytics and those visuals so your team knows what it is. And then it all goes back to strategy. So as your business evolves, as your goals evolve, we do that work with you. So we're both technology and services, really focused on ROI. People often ask, like, so how do you integrate? How does it work? So everything's set up in our application in the cloud. And then we have various different ways to integrate. So whether you're on Drupal or AEM or using Adobe DTM or Google Tag Manager, we speak that language. If you do have a Shopify site, we have a plugin. If you just have a simple blog, we have a WordPress plugin. But again, everything is built sort of so that we can do it at scale with sophisticated markup. And we have 2 ways of doing it. People know us in that 2015 world. We had our editor. It's really good for page by page, but it's our highlighter that really sort of people adore, because you set it up once for a set of pages, and as you build new pages, so if crowd content's building you new content, and you're kind of building out maybe use cases or case studies, and they meet that same template, they're organized that same way, we know exactly what rich result we're trying to achieve. Every time you publish it, it's just automatically optimized. So we often joke, like, structured data while you have more coffee breaks, right? That's the fun part. We're super proud of the customers that we work with and the opportunity that we get to sort of help many, many kind of global brands be found, be understood, and help them take control. So that's all I prepared for you today. In order to find out, like, if structured data is an area of interest, the best way is to actually follow Schema App on LinkedIn. So you can go to LinkedIn, click follow. We publish a ton of content there. We share, webinars like this, articles and blogs that we put out, as well as sort of like videos that I put together, sort of understanding sort of small nuggets. So if you want to know more, you can also follow me on Twitter, but LinkedIn, following Schema App is the best place for you to go.
Well, thank you very much, Martha. That's really, really, really helpful, and it was really in depth. And I think the audience can definitely get started. And I 100% agree. Like you guys are expert in the industry, well, specifically in that core part of SEO, right? Which I think everyone can benefit from your knowledge and the resource that you share, and it's obviously free for everyone to access, right? So definitely do so. We will share all the contact details for on our blog post, which after the webinar we'll kind of post the recording as well as the contact details, so you can definitely look through and get connected. And I think one thought that I had, like it's great, like if you want to get started on your own with the schema markup, awesome, you can get started. There's no issues with it, obviously, but I think scaling it is the most difficult part, right? If you're producing the similar content, adding like the schema markup like manually to those individual pages is like a nightmare. So having a partner like Schema App or similar services, like whatever you prefer, I would recommend doing that because it's like templated solution. You can scale it, it's easy to manage, and changing things is also easy too. Like if Google changed something, then you have to go through each and every single pages and make that change, which is kind of nightmare. So
Well, and if you're just getting started, there's also free resources out there. And so I'll highlight some of my favorites. So, like I always joke with Yoast, like we use Yoast for SEO. Like they do like good general like blog posting schema markup, but so do we. So our free WordPress plugin like is a great way. If you have customers with blogs on WordPress, like start there. Free WordPress plugin from us. It's like great sophisticated schema markup. It doesn't get into like the services and the products and the FAQs and so forth, but it's a great starting point. The other generator that's really good is Merkel has like a technical SEO page that has a generator, and they allow you to do generate some simple schema markup. So if you're working with an SMB where there's a very small website and you want to just like try that out, you can copy and paste that JSON-LD on the site. Again, make sure you keep it updated and maintained since Google is looking for that. But that's a good generator. And then we do have an offering that is for sort of more the SMB that generates the structured data and gets you email support from us, called Schema App Pro. And that sort of, again, integrates with everything. And it's a great place to start. But our bread and butter, like what we're amazing at is when we get to do our high touch support and strategy work and sort of do it at scale.
awesome, thank you. So you do have some questions that I'd like to kind of focus on.
Sure.
And then, I mean, they're kind of similar. So I'll just pick like a few. I know that we're kind of almost out of time. I know we still have a few more minutes. So one question that I have here is that, what are your recommendations for website that produce content around algorithm, EAT algorithm?
EAT, yeah. So EAT is super fun because, within structured data, so you're often calling something out. So the example I used was like a physician, right? And for a physician, then you can explain sort of like where they're an alumni from, what's the area of practice, what are the hospitals that they work at. And you can start building relationships sort of between, I'll say like really specific information about them. They're the author of, and then you can list their publications. And so when Google sees these, you're able to sort of then, build expertise and authority based on information about, let's say, that person. And so the same goes for authors. So again, if you're thinking about a blog and you're talking about, who is the author, what do we know about them, what is their relationship to other things, you can start using within schema.org the properties in order to define them. And one of the things that we often do, and again, physicians are an easy one to explain, but like let's say you're like you're an expert in a certain area, you have a medical specialty, we then would use like a Wikipedia definition or a Wikipedia page in order to define what that practice is, because Google knows what that page is about, right? Like it's within their knowledge graph. And so you can use Wikipedia or Google Knowledge Graph in order to define exactly what that is. And so there's some advanced sort of EAT areas. I believe we do have a blog post on our website that talks about kind of further examples, but this is where, like, again, understanding schema.org and understanding the properties that you can use to very clearly define people's expertise is really important.
Great. And the other kind of interesting one, is there a way that you can hide our structured data codes so that our competitors can't see them?
Yeah, so this is a fun one, right? So it's like where, you do all this great strategy work and you build your structured data and then all your competitors can see it because it's visible to everybody. So today, no, there's, not a way. Now, what's interesting excuse me, is in the podcast that just came out on April 7th, is that, Ryan Levering talked about sort of like a future state where you're publishing your structured data directly to Google. Now that's interesting because one, sort of you remove the challenge of like getting it integrated into your website. But then you also sort of, like, can other people read it then, right? Or is it just like Google is consuming it? Now there's a challenge also of like making sure it represents what's on your page. So you still almost like need to generate it off your website sort of to then publish it. But that might be the only scenario I can think of today that it comes up. And it means like you have to be, you have to work on execution, right? Like I would say most of our customers, it's not so much that they don't know what to do, is that they can't get it done. And so it's that, like getting it done. That's really key. And again, that's where Schema App is trying to help customers solve that problem.
Awesome. And then how often should someone audit their website for structured data error?
Yeah. So just like you're looking at other errors across your site on a like at least quarterly basis, like you should be looking at it regularly. So this is not a sort of like done, forget, like we'll look at that later. Just like you should be evaluating your performance monthly, you should be also then like trying to maintain that good health. So whether it's again, like I think of 500 errors or other sort of health indicators on your website. The same goes for structured data. Now, again, if you're doing a good job sort of maintaining it and keeping it sort of like representing content on your page and architecting your content to make sure it has as required and recommended, that tends to be sort of where you get your errors. And so sometimes also errors may be okay. For example, like if you have a product rich result and you're not going to include price, or you have a job posting and you don't include salary, that could be a business choice as well. So sometimes an error is like, oh, well, we know that's an error because like we've chosen not to include that information on the page.
Awesome. And sorry, I'll just take one last one. How do we future-proof schema markup?
How do you future-proof Schema Markup? So I think this goes like, how do you future-proof your content strategy, right? Like you constantly are learning. So I think that the piece is that you can't just be like, oh, we're just going to do this and it's going to work forever. SEO is a fun area to work in because it's constantly changing. Like Google's unpredictable and, continues to change the rules. So I would say is, just like you're evolving your content strategy and making sure your content's meeting your user needs, you need to also be sort of measuring, what's working, what's converting out of the rich results and out of content, and then, learn, apply, try again, evolve. So I think future proofing is just like make a plan to maintain it and stay on top of it and educate yourself about it or partner with an expert.
Awesome. All right. Thank you very much. It was really, really helpful and really in depth, and I really loved it as well. And then as usual, like we will share the recording and publish it as a blog as well. And then to follow Martha and the company to kind of get more insight into the schema world. And thank you very much for joining in and tuning in, everyone. And Martha, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me. Have a great day.
All right. Take care. Bye.